something has exploded across Britain. On motorways, in towns, and online, a powerful message is being sent, not whispered, but shouted for the whole world to hear. The people are no longer pleading with their government. They are no longer begging politicians. Instead, their voices have turned to the palace itself. A cry that echoes through banners, protests, and furious demands. King Charles, dissolve Parliament, fire these traitors. This is not a small grumble. This is not fringe anger. This is the rising roar of a nation that feels abandoned, betrayed, and silenced. And now the question shakes the very foundation of Britain's system. Will the king act? Or will he be remembered as the monarch who stood by while his people suffered? Britain is reaching a breaking point. Across the nation, ordinary citizens are taking matters into their own hands, sending a message directly to King Charles. Just days ago, a massive banner was unveiled on the M53 motorway. It didn't ask politely. It demanded, "Charles, do your job, fire these traitors." To some, it may look like nothing more than protest graffiti, but for millions across the UK, it is a desperate plea, a warning, and a declaration that enough is enough. These words capture the mood of a restless nation that feels Parliament no longer serves the people, but instead serves global elites, foreign interests, and their own careers. It is anger spilling out in the open, anger directed not at a single politician, but at the very heart of power itself. For centuries, the monarchy has stood as the ultimate safeguard, the final line of defence when politicians lose their way. It is true that, in modern times, the Crown has stepped back from direct intervention. But the truth remains, King Charles does still hold reserve powers, powers that could change everything in an instant. Among them is the right to dissolve Parliament and trigger a general election. It is a power rarely spoken about, a power seen as symbolic. Yet in today's climate, it is being called upon as the last hope of a people who feel voiceless in their own land. Critics call it unthinkable. Supporters call it necessary. And as this demand grows louder, the king's silence is becoming deafening. The fury is not abstract. It is rooted in real crises that cut deep into the daily lives of British citizens. The cost of living continues to soar, with families choosing between heating their homes or putting food on the table. Migration is at historic levels, flooding towns and cities while straining public services to the breaking point. And the sense of national identity, the feeling of being at home in one's own country, is fading under policies many see as destructive and indifferent. To millions, Parliament has become a chamber that debates endlessly, postures shamelessly, and delivers nothing. While citizens struggle, politicians collect salaries and follow agendas that have little to do with the will of the people. This is why the call has shifted beyond Westminster. People are no longer shouting at MPs. They are shouting at their king. The demand for Charles to act is not just political, it is symbolic. It represents a yearning for leadership, for strength, for someone who dares to stand above party squabbles and put the people first. But here lies the danger for the monarchy. If Charles continues to ignore this call, if he continues to appear more concerned with international summits, environmental lobbying, and global institutions than the cries of his own subjects, the monarchy itself could lose the very foundation of its legitimacy. What good is a monarch, many ask, if he will not act in the hour of greatest need? What good is tradition if it means standing by in silence while the nation crumbles? This is the tension now gripping Britain. On one hand, convention and tradition say the monarch must not interfere. On the other hand, the people say interference is not only justified, it is essential. Parliament, they argue, has already broken faith with the public. Parliament has already created the chaos, the instability, the betrayal. Therefore, the crisis is here, not if Charles acts, but because Parliament refuses to. And so, ordinary Britons are taking their anger public, sending a message the king cannot ignore forever. Either he steps in or he risks being remembered as weak, spineless, and irrelevant. A monarch who betrayed his duty at the moment it mattered most. As Britain watches this storm unfold, the spotlight on King Charles has never been brighter. For weeks, citizens have spoken with growing urgency, demanding action, demanding leadership, demanding that the monarchy prove it still matters in the 21st century. What makes this moment so explosive is that it is no longer just a debate in Parliament or an argument in the newspapers. This is not the chatter of a political elite. This is the will of ordinary Britons spilling onto the streets, across motorways, and in viral campaigns online. And the question at the centre of it all is as sharp as it is dangerous. Does King Charles have the courage to act? Or will he hide behind convention while the country falls apart around him? The stakes could not be higher. If the king dissolves Parliament, he would unleash the most dramatic constitutional crisis in modern British history. It would shake the foundations of Westminster and ignite a firestorm of anger from the political establishment. Yet for millions of citizens, that crisis has already arrived. They see their nation collapsing under the weight of uncontrolled migration, rising crime, and soaring costs of living. They see politicians debating endlessly while refusing to fix the most basic problems tearing communities apart. And they ask, if not now, then when? If the monarch's powers are never to be used, then what purpose do they serve? This is the boiling rage driving the demand for Charles to act, and it grows more intense by the day. The frustration has become personal. Many Britons believe their voices have been deliberately silenced. The promise of democracy, that the people are sovereign, that government serves the public, feels broken. They vote, yet they see policies emerge that run directly against their wishes. They protest, but they are dismissed as extremists. They cry out for protection, but they are told to accept decline as the new normal. The gap between the governed and those who govern has widened into a chasm. And in that chasm lies the monarchy, caught between the expectations of tradition and the demands of the people. Charles is expected to rise above politics, yet the people are now dragging him into the heart of the storm, forcing him to confront the very crisis politicians refuse to face. The imagery of that motorway banner, "Charles, do your job, fire these traitors," has seared itself into the public imagination. It is not just words on a bridge. It is a symbol of desperation, of fury, of a nation that feels betrayed. The monarchy, once seen as distant but comforting, has suddenly been thrust into the role of saviour. Britons do not want more speeches about climate change. They do not want symbolic gestures at global summits. They want decisive action in their own country, for their own people, in their own time of need. That is the demand now hammering at the gates of Buckingham Palace, and the silence in response is beginning to look less like restraint and more like betrayal. What makes the situation even more volatile is the sheer scale of disillusionment with Parliament. Every new scandal, every broken promise, every policy that favours outsiders over citizens fuels the fire. The Labour government, now under intense criticism, faces accusations of putting the interests of illegal migrants and global institutions above those of ordinary Britons. Communities are being reshaped without consent. Local services are collapsing under pressure. Families are losing faith that their children will grow up in a country that feels like their own. And with each passing day, the question grows louder. If Parliament cannot or will not act, why shouldn't the King? It is this sense of abandonment that fuels the demand for Charles to dissolve Parliament. To many, it would not be an act of chaos, but an act of salvation. The first step toward restoring order, trust, and accountability. It would be the King declaring that the people matter more than convention, that Britain matters more than the comfort of politicians. Supporters of this bold move argue that it would breathe new life into a monarchy increasingly dismissed as ceremonial and powerless. For Charles, it could be the moment to prove he is not a weak and timid figure, but a king willing to bear the weight of his crown. But hesitation carries its own price. The longer he waits, the more the perception grows that he is nothing more than a figurehead, bowing to political correctness and international agendas while ignoring the cries of his own citizens. The fury rising across Britain is not abstract. It is real, tangible, and dangerous. It carries with it the potential to redefine the role of the monarchy for generations to come. If Charles acts, he could ignite a new era of royal authority, winning the admiration of millions who feel voiceless. If he does nothing, his reign may go down in history as one of weakness, irrelevance, and betrayal. This is the razor's edge upon which Britain now balances, a choice between bold action and silent decline, between a monarchy that matters and a monarchy that disappears into obscurity. The anger spreading through Britain is no longer confined to quiet conversations at dinner tables or frustrated rants on social media. It has transformed into a movement, a collective roar of frustration that now echoes across the entire nation. Ordinary citizens, once patient and trusting in the promises of their leaders, now feel utterly abandoned. And they see Parliament as a body no longer representing them, but working against them, pushing policies that weaken communities, erode national identity, and prioritise global interests over British families. This is why so many eyes have turned to King Charles. For generations, the monarchy has been seen as a steady force, a guardian of the people when politicians falter. And now, in this moment of growing turmoil, millions are asking whether Charles will finally rise to that role, or whether he will remain silent, allowing Britain to sink further into crisis. Every day, the evidence of betrayal mounts. People look at their towns and see services stretched to the breaking point. They witness crime rising in their neighbourhoods, with too many stories of violence, assaults, and exploitation tied directly to the failures of border control. Families watch as their children face overcrowded schools, while their parents struggle in underfunded hospitals. They ask, how did Britain get here? The answer they find is damning. A parliament more interested in virtue signalling and international posturing than in protecting its own people. For many, Labour's decisions on immigration, particularly the scrapping of the Rwanda plan, confirmed the worst fears. That the government is not just failing, but actively refusing to defend the nation's borders. Against this backdrop of weakness, citizens are demanding that the monarchy act as the final line of defence. What makes this demand so extraordinary is not simply the anger behind it, but the symbolism it carries. The monarchy has always existed as a safeguard, even if rarely used. Reserve powers, including the ability to dissolve Parliament, remain on the books for moments of grave national crisis. Supporters of action argue that Britain is already in such a crisis. They point to record-breaking migration numbers, rising costs of living, collapsing public services, and communities on the verge of breaking apart. In their eyes, the crisis is not theoretical. It is lived reality. They believe Parliament has already abandoned its duty, and so the Crown must intervene. By dissolving Parliament, Charles would not be creating instability, they argue. He would be restoring it, forcing an election, and returning the decision to the people themselves. Of course, critics paint a very different picture. They insist that if Charles were to step in, it would create chaos, unlike anything Britain has seen in modern history. They warn of a constitutional storm, a clash between monarchy and Parliament that could shatter centuries of convention. Yet this argument, while powerful in theory, fails to resonate with the people living through today's hardships. They ask, what is the point of stability if that stability only means decline? What is the point of order if it comes at the cost of national survival? To many, the greater danger lies in doing nothing. The greater betrayal would be silence. In their view, if Charles ignores the cries of his people now, then the monarchy itself risks fading into irrelevance, dismissed as a powerless relic that chose tradition over duty. And herein lies the dangerous paradox. Charles is caught in a trap where either choice carries immense consequences. To act would defy centuries of political convention, but to refuse may permanently sever the trust between crown and people. This is the razor's edge upon which the monarchy now stands. The people's demand is clear: dissolve Parliament and call for a general election. It is not a whisper, but a roar, a demand that grows louder each day. The king's hesitation, however, is feeding that fury, turning frustration into outright contempt. Many now accuse him of weakness, of bowing to global elites and international institutions while ignoring his duty at home. Each day he remains silent. The cries of "do your job" grow more forceful, echoing across bridges, towns, and communities that no longer believe Westminster can save them. This is not just a political battle, it is a struggle for the soul of Britain. At stake is not only the direction of government policy, but the very relevance of the monarchy in a time of crisis. For centuries, the crown has been a symbol of unity, tradition, and resilience. But symbols are not enough when people feel abandoned. Symbols cannot put food on the table, secure the nation's borders, or restore public trust. The people do not want more speeches about modern monarchy. They do not want more symbolic gestures of inclusivity or global cooperation. They want decisive action, action that proves the crown still has meaning in the lives of ordinary Britons. Whether Charles realises it or not, his next move will define not just his reign, but the future of the monarchy itself. Britain now stands at a crossroads unlike any it has faced in living memory. The fury of the people has reached a pitch that can no longer be dismissed as background noise. It has become the drumbeat of a nation demanding change. Every banner hung across a motorway, every viral video calling out the monarchy, every voice shouting that Parliament has betrayed the people, is a sign that the storm is already here. The demand is not complicated, and it is not hidden. Dissolve Parliament, call a general election, and return power to the people. Yet as this message grows louder, King Charles remains silent, and his silence has become deafening. This silence is no longer seen as neutrality or restraint. It is increasingly seen as cowardice. It is feeding the anger, convincing many that the king is unwilling or unable to protect his nation at its moment of greatest need. The weight of expectation now presses heavily on the monarchy. If Charles refuses to act, the institution itself will be placed under scrutiny in ways it has not experienced for centuries. People will ask, what is the point of a king who refuses to lead? What is the point of maintaining a crown that exists only for ceremonial displays and symbolic speeches? The fury will not remain directed only at Parliament, but will spread to the palace, fueling a dangerous loss of faith in both the political and royal establishments. The monarchy, once seen as a safeguard, would instead be remembered as complicit in the betrayal of the people. The calls for reform or even abolition would grow louder, fueled by a belief that the king had a chance to act but chose weakness instead. In such a scenario, the crown would not simply fade quietly into irrelevance, it would collapse under the weight of public contempt. On the other hand, if Charles were to dissolve Parliament, the risks would be monumental, but so would the rewards. It would trigger an immediate political earthquake, sending shockwaves through Westminster and across the world. Politicians, journalists, and constitutional experts would cry foul, declaring it the gravest breach of modern convention. There would be outrage from elites, from global institutions, and from foreign governments. But within Britain, the mood could be entirely different. For the millions of citizens who feel abandoned and voiceless, it would be an act of salvation. It would prove that the crown still stands for them, that the monarchy is not just a relic, but a living institution willing to fight for the nation's survival. It could transform Charles's reign overnight, turning him from a timid monarch into a figure of strength, courage, and loyalty to his people. It could cement his legacy as the king who put Britain first. This is the defining tension of the moment. Betrayal versus salvation, weakness versus courage, silence versus action. The people have already made their choice. They are calling for decisive leadership, for a king who understands that convention must bend when the nation itself is breaking. They are tired of excuses from politicians, tired of betrayals from Westminster, tired of being told that decline is inevitable. Their demand is simple. Charles, do your job. Either the king acts and proves he is worthy of the crown, or he refuses and risks watching the monarchy itself crumble under the anger of the people. This is not hyperbole, it is the raw reality of a nation at the edge of crisis. In the end, the decision rests with one man. The powers exist, the people are demanding them, and the moment of reckoning has arrived. King Charles can dissolve Parliament, call a general election, and restore trust by returning power to the people. Or he can remain silent, bound by tradition and fear, and watch as his reign becomes defined by weakness and betrayal. Britain is not asking politely anymore. It is demanding. The cry is growing louder every day, echoing from motorways to town squares. Act now or lose the people forever. And when history looks back on this moment, it will not remember the excuses or the caution. It will remember whether the king rose to the challenge, or whether he turned his back on the nation that once looked to him for strength.